As far as coaching rumors, first non-rumors. The Chargers had requested and have already interviewed Patrick Graham for their head coaching vacancy, and I think today, the Seahawks have requested an interview with Raiders defensive coordinator Patrick Graham for their head coaching vacancy. Okay. As far as Antonio Pierce, he has had a virtual interview with the Titans. He has also been requested for an interview with the Atlanta Falcons. Okay, so that's heating up there. He also is obviously the Raiders. He met with the Raiders today. Okay. Martin Luther King Day. We saw the picture to start the show. He was with Richard Seymour and Champ Kelly at the parade today in Vegas. So I want to say, if I'm not mistaken, Champ Kelly also was brought in for a follow-up general manager interview today. So that's a second interview for Champ Kelly. I'm curious who else is going to get a second interview. We'll get to coaches, or we'll get to GMs later, but it feels like the writing's on the wall, right? But as far as Raiders candidates, is that the next topic?
Coaching candidates?
Yeah.
No, GM candidates.
Okay. So okay. All right. So I'll do this first. Here's the big rumor. If Antonio Pierce, and actually you can pull it up on Twitter, it's the second tweet that I sent you all the way at the top. If Antonio Pierce is kept, there's a rumor that former Cardinals head coach Cliff Kingsbury is a strong candidate for the Raiders' open offensive coordinator position should they keep Antonio Pierce.
There he is. It shows,
he's currently at USC and is very close with one Caleb Williams.
Caleb isn't falling to wherever the Raiders are drafting to.
No, they're not, but all this talk about them needing a quarterback and being close to winning games, could they trade up?
It would take an unthinkable amount of draft capital, and
it would be a Trey Lance trade.
It would be a Trey Lance trade. And I feel like, all right, so in retrospect, if you look at the draft class that the 49ers selected Trey Lance in, I don't know if all right, Trevor Lawrence is probably by far the best quarterback to come out of that draft class. And that draft class had sure things at quarterback, right? Like each guy, it was talked about as the most loaded quarterback draft class in a long time. And I don't think that it worked out for, really, it's not working out for Trevor Lawrence right now. And I like Trevor Lawrence. But, they completely checked out of that last game and didn't make the playoffs. Like, I don't know what the hell that was all about. There's no excuse for them not to have made the playoffs.
Yep. So I think this is a great, if it is Antonio Pierce and it is Cliff Kingsbury at offensive coordinator, that's a guy who's been relatively known for quarterback development.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was with the Cardinals,
didn't he coach Mahomes?
I want to say yes. He was He was the coach for Mahomes
at Texas A&M, right?
Texas Tech, but yes.
Texas Tech. Sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Was it
the
Texas
Red Raiders? But that's what you were mentioning earlier. It was like, how can you trust that the offensive, coaching staff can bring in and develop a quarterback properly? I think this guy would give you that. I think he would. He was with the Cardinals for 3 or 4 years. The first 3 or 2 years, really good. Really good. And then they fell off. Kyler gets hurt. Whatever. But I think I would be here for it,
I never liked Cliff Kingsbury as a head coach, but I don't think that there's any denying the fact, like the impact that he has on his quarterbacks, because I witnessed it in person. I saw him run right in front of my face because I was sitting so close to the field. I witnessed him run from their locker room over to their sideline. This was, I want to say, week 7 of 2021, whenever the Niners played the Cardinals at home. And the 49ers got spanked by Colt McCoy, not even their starting quarterback. Like, I was thinking, oh man, we're really about to, just absolutely spank the Cardinals. And instead, I had to witness my team getting demolished. And the Niners were good.
Yep.
So, I think that Cliff Kingsbury absolutely has shown that he has a good track record of, getting good production out of quarterbacks or being at least good for their development. So I think he definitely has my thumbs up. If you're a Raider fan watching this, I think this would be a good hire for quarterback coach or offensive coordinator.
So then this is really the final thing as far as coaching rumors. And this is less of a rumor. Well, I'll give you the fact, and then I'll give you some like potential.
Mm-hmm.
The two guys who have interviewed, or actually have been confirmed to be interviewing with the Raiders, are Antonio Pierce and Leslie Frazier. Leslie Frazier, former Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator, I want to say, and Minnesota Vikings head coach.
Mm-hmm.
And he's been in coaching, hiring circles for the past couple of years, it feels like, and yet he didn't coach this year, So I hate to speculate here, but this doesn't feel serious to me, if you get what I'm kind of throwing down. Rooney Rule,
But wouldn't Antonio Pierce satisfy the Rooney Rule?
So according to Vic Tafer, the Raiders have to interview 2 external head coach candidates. Leslie Frazier would be one of them. So they have to still interview one other guy, I'm assuming of color, to satisfy the Rooney Rule.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know, man. That rule to me, I feel like instead of getting the results that it's supposed to get, I feel like that rule just wastes people's time in giving them interviews for positions that they have, they're not gonna like get. You know what I mean? Like the owner or general manager is just doing it to satisfy this prerequisite in order to hire the head coach that they had in mind. I think it's kind of messed up. And I think that's the common opinion too. It's not even like a hot take that I'm saying right now. It's like everybody kind of feels the same way about that rule. I do think that the 3rd round comp pick rule is getting results though. I think, you're getting or at least Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers are doing a great job of showcasing, black coaches, and they're getting hired, all across the league. Even Steve Wilkes is being interviewed for head coaching positions. I don't know if it's to satisfy the Rooney Rule, but I have to imagine that Steve Wilkes is a pretty good candidate, for a team. He almost got the Panthers head coaching job, but they decided not to retain him. So
I think the guy to look out for outside of the Raiders and Niners is I'm going to get his name wrong, Ejiro Evero, defensive coordinator for the Panthers. I could see him getting a head coaching job. But I haven't heard anything about the only 2 coaches, again, that have been confirmed to be getting interviews or have already been interviewed. Antonio Pierce, interviewed today. Leslie Frazier, getting interviewed tomorrow. I'll give you a couple more names just to consider. Obviously, we mentioned Cliff Kingsbury at offensive coordinator. The 2 other names for me that stick out for the Raiders head coaching job, should it not be Antonio Pierce. Although, as of today and everything with Max Crosby, it feels like the writing is on the wall that it's probably going to be Pierce, but we'll see. Because they're still early in that development process of interviewing guys. The two other names for me, obviously Jim Harbaugh and Mike Vrabel. Mike Vrabel would be interesting because he's also a defensive-minded head coach, which probably leads you to change, but maybe, just maybe, he keeps Patrick Graham. But I don't know. I like Vrabel. That's my thing. I think Vrabel's one of the best coaches in the league, and yeah, the Titans firing him is a mistake. But I also think that this is probably the wrong timing for the Raiders to get him. If the Raiders are coming off of just Josh McDaniels, like Josh McDaniels got fired a week ago, I would be saying Mike Vrabel's the guy, period. Other than Jim Harbaugh. I'd be fighting for Mike Vrabel right now. But because we're coming off of a defensive-minded head coach and the success of Patrick Graham, I don't quite see it with Vrabel, but I would be here for it because I think he's that good.
I would have Antonio Pierce above Mike Vrabel just for the fact that Vrabel has now drafted two quarterbacks in the past couple of years with pretty high picks, and he can't figure it out. And the Raiders right now, they absolutely, their number one need is quarterback and offensive line, but quarterback is that number one need.
See, that's my thing with Vrabel, and also in a way with Harbaugh. And again, Harbaugh's been very well proven in this league, although I think Baki was a big part of drafting players at that time. And the big rumor with Harbaugh is that wherever he goes, he wants full control, personnel, everything. Right? He wants to be the GM. And that's something I've been saying.
He wants his own GM. He wants his
own GM, but he wants his say on which players we are drafting, right? Whereas usually in NFL front offices, the general manager is in charge of personnel. He gets that personnel to the head coach and tells them, "Hey, go coach," right? That's the way the structure is supposed to be. But then you have occasionally those coaches, Bill Belichick, apparently Jim Harbaugh, right? Some of those guys that are like, well, I'm going to be the GM too. It's my John Gruden, right? You could even say Josh McDaniels. Not the best track record, Mike Vrabel's not that guy. So here's my thing. To me, the past general manager for the Titans failed Mike Vrabel. When you watch him coach, he's one of the best to do it. But what he was given was not the best, right? So he's trying to build Legos with like Play-Doh, It wasn't going to work for him. And then finally he was the fall guy. You bring in Harbaugh and you tell him, yeah, go ahead, do the personnel, sure. That's not what he's known for. He's known for being a great coach, not for being a personnel guy,
Look at what he did with Michigan. Look at what he did with Michigan. And I know that's college and it's not apples to apples, but
right. But that's recruiting classes, and I'm sure Michigan has. I don't know how college football works, but I'm sure that you have a lot of scouts that have to go out across the country to give out, offers to these high school players. Mm-hmm. Is Jim Harbaugh going to every single high school from California to Nevada to Tennessee to Seattle to Florida to New York to Buffalo and then down to Texas? Is he doing all that? No.
But you know what he is doing? You know what he is doing? He's building Legos out of Play-Doh because Alex Smith's career was in the dump. And he took the same guy that was like getting benched by Mike Singletary and turned him into, he wasn't a Pro Bowl quarterback, but he went to the NFC Championship game. The next guy was explosive, took down Aaron Rodgers and the Packers in the playoffs. He went to the Super Bowl. Like, this guy coached Andrew Luck. And I mean, I don't know anything about J.J. McCarthy, but I know that he just won the national championship and is the starting quarterback for the Michigan Wolverines. So,
you know who else is doing that right now? With turning a quarterback around from like, he's not that good to, we're winning playoff games and this quarterback's playing really good for us. Dan Campbell.
Yeah,
Jared Goff.
Dan Campbell's doing a really good job, but
And
Jared
yet Dan
Goff
Campbell. Go ahead.
Jared Goff went to a Super Bowl before Dan Campbell.
And he was a
It's just
former
because
number one
Sean
overall
McVay
pick.
doesn't know what he wants. One week Sean McVay wants Cam Akers, the next week it's like, come back here. And then
Right.
now he's got Kyron Williams, but that was like a whole thing with Sean McVay.
Well, I think with the Rams, the feeling was, well, Jared Goff is holding us back, yada, yada, yada. And the play on the field looked like it,
Mm-hmm.
And it probably didn't help that Todd Gurley turned into a 75-year-old man from the knees down. But I don't know what the hell happened there. But, clearly Jared Goff was the fall guy. But he wasn't playing up to that number one overall pick standard that he was held to, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could argue that he was part of the reason why they didn't win the Super Bowl that they played in against the Patriots for the Rams. And as far as Alex Smith, I mean, they're both ex-first overall picks. I would say Jared Goff was coached well, whereas Alex Smith wasn't. And that's the difference. Where, I mean, Jared Goff gets traded, and it's like, yeah, he's clearly still a starter for us. And Dan Campbell was very point blank about that, right? Whereas Alex Smith, it was like, Harbaugh came in, and it was like, no, we're going to get this to work. And it did. And that's good. Really good. And they bring in Kaepernick, and that works for a while. Really good. My point to Campbell is Campbell's a former tight end. It's not like he's a quarterback guru. That might be Ben Johnson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which that's another name to look out for, not really for the Raiders, but for other teams. I just think, Dan Campbell's this rah-rah guy who instilled a culture, and it worked. And that's more along the lane of Antonio Pierce. I'm not saying that Antonio Pierce is going to be Dan Campbell, but that was something that Crosby said on his podcast, was like, man, we feel like we're the Lions of last year. Like, we started off like shit, but then we picked it up at the end and played really, really well. And we just need a few more pieces, continuity, and come into next season on fire. Maybe it won't happen, but it feels like it kind of can. Especially if they, and I don't know if I do this, but imagine them trading their next 2 first-round picks or however much they have to do. They go get Caleb Williams, and it works, right? In the free agency, they have plenty of money. They get themselves an offensive guard, a defensive tackle, and another corner. In the draft, they trade up. They get Caleb Williams. They still have maybe a third-round pick. They get another corner or whatever player, another lineman, whatever. And then you go out next season, and boom, it's like, here we go. We're going. And they win. Like, that would feel like Dan Campbell, That would feel like this year's Lions. I'm not saying they're going to go and win 12 wins next season, but I can't help but think that they might be that close if you just have the special quarterback, with this defense. But we shall see.
Yes. Let's get to a couple comments because I've been really putting them off. So I apologize to Anthony and Joel for your guys' comments that have been sitting on the burner. So Anthony says, hire AP, Champ Kelly, go get Justin Fields, hire Arthur Smith or Cliff Kingsbury. I would vomit if the Raiders hired Arthur Smith, and I think Mike would too. But
yeah, I wouldn't be happy.
Yeah,
Cliff Kingsbury, I'm here for.
Yeah, I give the thumbs up on that. Anthony also says, if the Bears don't use the 5th-year option on Justin Fields, give them a 3rd-round pick.
So the thing with Fields, obviously a lot of Bears fans want to keep him. It'll come down to the GM, I think. Do they decide, it's more wise to pick the first overall quarterback in Caleb Williams and have 5 years for that contract rather than just 1 or 2 with Justin Fields, and then having to re-sign him and limiting your cap space later, right? That might be the wise thing for them, but also it's not guaranteed that Caleb Williams is going to be as good as Justin Fields, right? So that's the decision they have to make. Whatever they go with, whichever quarterback they decide not to go with, if I'm the Raiders, I'm very interested, especially if I have Cliff Kingsbury, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Justin Fields is available and you can give him 1 or 2 third-round picks to get him, oh yeah. I mean, It would take at least a second round pick, I think, by the way. But yeah.
Uh,
And that's
yeah.
the other thing. The trade has to happen before the 5th-year option deadline. Because if they don't pick up his 5th-year option and then they go, well, actually, we're going to trade him, teams are going to be pissed off and like, well, we're not giving you a second-round pick. Like Anthony's saying. That would be stupid of them. They need to make that decision beforehand.
Anthony's saying a 3rd-round pick if they don't pick it up, and then a 5th-round pick. I mean, a 2nd-round pick if they do pick up the 5th-year option.
I'll tell you right now, they're going to pick it up because that elevates his trade value. Yeah. And even if they don't trade him, then they have a 2nd year under contract with him, right? That's way cheaper than whatever he's going to be asking for in a year from now. So they have to pick up that 5th-year option.
And then Joel says, does Harbaugh rebuild this roster or how much? And I think Mike kind of, hit it on the head. If they don't win or if they don't make the playoffs in their first year as, with Harbaugh as a head coach, I don't know if, I think that they'll probably, I'd have to imagine that he'd rebuild because if he can't be successful with that team, he would probably need to do something differently and do kind of what he did with Michigan when there was like the turnover period. Because they weren't like a top school in their first year, it was like a slow rise to where they're at right now. But I mean, quick, it was quick, in terms of like where Michigan started and where they ended up this year. But it was like a gradual rise. Yeah. If that makes sense.
I think to answer this question, think of Josh McDaniels, but a better coach, obviously. But if the current roster doesn't work out in a season, suddenly Jim Harbaugh is going to have to think, well, I got to do whatever it takes to start winning my way, which probably means I'm going to rebuild. I'm going to, hey, maybe at that point, if they don't win and Max Crosby's pissed off because they didn't, keep Pierce, we're trading away another defensive end for 2 first-round picks. How does that sound, guys? How does that sound?
Hey, if you hit on those first, though, you look like a genius.
Yeah, but that's hard to fucking do. We already learned that, And you're also going to trade Devontae Adams. You're going to try to find a new quarterback. And they're going to go back to purgatory again. It's the cycle. That's what Max Crosby is trying to stay away from. And that's what I'm trying to stay away from.
Oh, real quick. Joel said that it would be concerning if Harbaugh went to LA. I think that has to be the second biggest concern as as it comes to hiring or not hiring Harbaugh. The first being whether or not you, the Raiders, believe that he is the top candidate available. And if you do believe that, then your second one is self-explanatory. You don't want him going to your division rival, plain and simple.
Can I say this too, before we answer this question? As far as Harbaugh and the Raiders, what if the Raiders, say, reached out to Harbaugh and said, hey, what are your end-all, be-all, what would you non-negotiables, right?
Yeah.
What are you, looking for here? I saw somebody on Twitter on a video, a post from, a radio show. He was like, yeah, it sounds like Harbaugh has already not come to terms with the Chargers, but, has already agreed on the financial amount. It's more of, he needs to see the facilities and meet with them and blah, 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 and get assurances I'm going to get this, authority and blah, 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 right? So, and I don't know if this guy's telling the truth or whatever, if he knows anything, but essentially, if what Harbaugh needs is to be the GM of the team, to be, judge, jury, executioner on the roster, if Mark Davis and company call him and say, hey, what are your non-negotiables? How much money are you looking for? And what sort of, power are you looking for this roster, for this team, for this franchise? And he tells them, about $12 million a year. And I gotta be in charge of personnel, not just the offense play calling, but also personnel for defense, everything, that right there might actually tell or sway Mark Davis and company to go, all right, well, thank you for your time. We're not gonna need an interview with you because that does not agree with our process. We want a general manager in charge.
Yeah. it's just a bad look if that process that Harbaugh has eventually wins the Super Bowl somewhere else, and it does, and the Raiders process doesn't win a Super Bowl. But like I said, it should be up to the Raiders ownership, front office to decide. And like I said earlier, not to the players to decide. They are the players. They are playing. They can voice their opinion, but I think the decision should be made in the people who are running the organization.
Yes, and I
And they
I
can
agree.
listen. They can listen to their players. I think that is a big factor in it, in what's going to eventually be their decision.
Right.
And rightfully so, because you don't want to bring in somebody who's not going to succeed because the players aren't going to buy in. But I feel like the Raiders players should try and keep an open mind. Is all I'm
Yeah.
going to say.
I guess I wish that Max Crosby didn't become so public with it, and that the reports didn't come out about this. I wish that it were kept in house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that he's really like, hey, this is how I feel, and blah 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe he can say to Mark Davis or the entire coaching candidacy hiring team, like, hey, just letting you know, like, this is how I feel, and nothing's off the table for me if you guys don't go with AP. Like, that's how strongly I feel about it. Like, if it was just like that, we wouldn't feel like the coaches are making the decision, the players, But instead,
Mm-hmm.
that's what it feels like because of this report on Max Crosby. But at the end of the day, I've always felt that I feel the Raiders are going to do their due diligence with Mark Davis, their entire team, and they're going to see, where they go from there. And I think after we get through these comments, we'll get to the GMs, and I think that's where it starts for them. Go ahead.
Yeah. This is going to be the last comment for right now, and then we're going to quickly go through our topics. So hopefully I can have enough time to talk about the Packers game, because it is getting a little. I mean, we've gone later, but I know you've got work bright and early, Mike. So Joel says, we need to know who the offensive coordinator is going to be first. But realistically, we all know that drafting a quarterback can be a crapshoot, but I'm willing to take the swing. Yeah, I mean, you got to respect it when teams do take the swing. I think that they're getting a guy like Cliff Kingsbury or Jim Harbaugh does make it a little bit easier to sort of feel more confident in the swing that you're taking on the quarterback.
100%. I agree with that. And also, it needs to be a healthy process between those coaches and the general manager.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of general manager, do you want to just quickly brush over some Raider general manager candidates?
Yes. So as far as, like I mentioned, they have only talked to 2 coaches so far, the Raiders. And that is, I believe, in part because they started with the general managers candidates. That's what they want to figure out first, and then get into the coaches after that. So first off, I mean, 2 years ago with Josh McDaniels and Ziegler, the idea was that Mark Davis wanted, a nice symbiotic relationship, right? So they went with general managers first. They interviewed them, and they asked them at the end of the interview, hey, what coaching candidate would you choose for your head coach? This general manager says this. This general manager says that, right? Eventually they get to Ziegler, and it's like, oh, Josh McDaniels. Again, Mark Davis is like, wait, he's available? Like 6-time Super Bowl champion offensive coordinator? Really? Yeah. Then he becomes the head coach. The word out on the street from Ian Rappaport was that if it weren't for that relationship between Ziegler and McDaniels, in essence, McDaniels being the selling point to Mark Davis, if it weren't for that, Ed Dodds would have probably been the general manager for the Raiders. And who knows who our coach would have been. So as far as today, the general manager candidates that have interviewed or at least been requested to be interviewed with the Raiders have been Champ Kelly, obviously the interim interim general manager for the Raiders right now. He has also met with the Panthers. Adam Peters, who we will get to, former 49ers assistant GM. Again, Ed Dodds, Colts assistant GM. He's been there for at least 3 or 4 years. He's at one point he was with the Raiders. He was with the Seahawks for a long time. He's been named by some as the number one GM candidate this offseason. And I remember 2 years ago when I went through all these different GM candidates that the Raiders had looked at, he was my favorite choice 2 years ago. And he's still with the Colts, and he's still available. And right now the rumor is it's between Dodds and Champ Kelly. But we'll see. Along with Dodds, Tom Telesco, formerly of the Chargers for 8 to 10 years, built up some really good teams, was paired with some really shitty coaches. I would say Tom Telesco and the Chargers is the anti-Mike Vrabel and the Titans. If you put Telesco and Vrabel on the same team, you might have a winning formula. And oddly enough, they're actually both options for the Raiders this offseason. But I don't know if I would go with Telesco. You have Terrence Gray, the Bills' director of player personnel. You have Trey Brown, who I believe also interviewed with the Raiders 2 years ago. He's the Bengals' senior personnel executive. And then the interesting name for me is Kelly Klein Van Callaghan, who is the Broncos' assistant GM. And it's a lot of names in there, but she was interviewed first. So she was formerly with the Vikings, and for the past 2 seasons, she's been with the Broncos. And apparently she's a very big part of their salary cap and, player personnel decision-making. So interesting, for sure. And go ahead.
No. I was just kind of fixated on the name. It was what?
Yeah, Kelly Klein Van Callaghan. Say
what
that
a
5
name.
times fast. Yeah. But I think if I had to pick my top 3 choices, it would probably come down to Ed Dodds, Champ Kelly, and Trey Brown. But Terrence Gray is probably also a great choice. And I mean, I think Kelly Klein Van Callaghan's an interesting, candidate, but I think she probably needs more experience. It doesn't sound like she's been, a high up ranking member for a long, long time. So I think with more experience, she will be a GM someday, I think.
Yeah. You ready to move on to the all pro players?
I am just about. I think the rumor and expectation from Raider fans recently has been, it sounds like they might be done with their GM process if they're moving on to coaches next. So some people were wondering, were they going to announce a GM today? And of course we saw that picture again. I'm going to, mention back to that again, but you had Seymour, who's one of these people who's in these meetings with all these candidates with Champ Kelly and Antonio Pierce in Las Vegas. So is it already writing on the wall, or what are we doing here? Are we just waiting for the Raiders to get through the coaching candidates, satisfy the Rooney Rule, and then, all right, it's official, we're running it back with Champ Kelly and Antonio Pierce? Or is Ed Dodds really a top candidate who might be the guy? And actually, a tweet I sent you from Mo Moten, he brings up a great point. And let me see if I can find it. Well, all right, here's first. I'll read this first. Here's a direct quote from Mark Davis via Deshaun Reed about Champ Kelly, and a comment from Rap Sheet in Rappaport about Ed Dodds. So from Rappaport first, the Raiders are set to interview their GM search. For their GM search, Ed Dodds. Had Las Vegas hired a GM independent of the coach last time, it would have been Dodds. He's a top candidate. And this is from Mark Davis through Deshaun Reed. Had I not done the pair of Dave and Josh, Champ may have gotten the job at that time, Champ Kelly. We were fortunate and grateful that he decided to come on board as the assistant general manager. So there was not even a question as to who would actually step into that position, I'm assuming, for the interim job. And then let me find the tweet from Mo Moten. Here it is. From Mo Moten. Maybe this is wishful thinking from me, but what if the Raiders hire Ed Dodds and Champ Kelly for their general manager and president of football operation roles? So you get a twofer. You bring in 2 guys, right? A while ago, Deshaun Reed posed the question about hiring a president of football ops. I think it could work if the Raiders hire AP. In other words, more leadership, more people to come in and help with building the roster and,
You just have to make sure that those guys are in lockstep and, are on the same page about everything. Because if not, it could further complicate things. And part of the appeal of having Antonio Pierce is that you're not getting this super complicated, structure. You're getting Antonio Pierce, the coach, and I don't really know what to make of Champ Kelly as the GM because he hasn't been GM for very long. It was Dave Ziegler beforehand. But so far what I know about this regime is whatever Antonio Pierce has, showed out in public over the past 9 weeks, 10 weeks now.
Yeah, I think the way I felt since Josh McDaniels was fired was I want a coach who coaches. I want a general manager who is in charge of personnel and does general manager things. The way Mo Moten puts this, hell yeah, I want a president of football ops that can help both of them with the process in the front office. I think that's the best case scenario is getting two guys who can lead the franchise from the top. And then you just tell Antonio Pierce, hey, we're going to get you your guys. You coach those guys. Patrick Graham on defense. You coach those guys, right? Cliff Kingsbury or whoever on offense. You coach your guys. We're going to get you that quarterback. You coach them. That's all they need to do. Do your job and just win, right? Mm-hmm. They don't need to make it hard. They don't need to put it all on the shoulders of one guy. A collaborative team to build a bully. That's what I want.